All right, so let's talk about hinges. So a hinge is usually symbolized for us something like this. It's pretty much with a sphere in there. And what's important to understand is that at the hinge, everything, every internal force except the moment is transmitted. So if I cut right through the hinge, what I would be looking at is that the moment would be equal to 0. So this does pretty much not exist. So the moment is equal to 0. However, it's important to understand that the shear force and the normal force still exist. So V has a value and N has a value of something other, x1 and x2 or whatever you want to call that. So, and since we're talking here also about other connection types, let me just briefly introduce to you that while not part of this lecture, there are also normal force connections, if you want to call them that way, in which you have pretty much a system in which everything is transmitted except the normal forces, and then you have the same thing for shear forces, and that looks a little bit like a battery in electrical engineering, but it's something very different. It's effectively where the shear force goes to 0. So if I were to cut right through these systems, we would find that the moment exists. The moment can be transmitted here. It's equal to something. The shear force is equal to something, but the normal force is actually going to 0. So the normal force would be equal to 0. And very similar for the shear force connection, or the connection at which the shear force goes to 0, which effectively looks like this. And I'm cutting right through the middle there. And now I still have my moment. I still have my normal force. But I do not have a shear force anymore. So shear force would be equal to 0. However, in this class, we mostly focus on the hinge. So I'm going to repeat real quick that at the hinge, the moment is equal to 0. This is very different from the sum of the moments is equal to 0, which sometimes can be read somewhere. This is true still. So the sum of the moments is still equal to 0, but that's true everywhere along the system. The hinge just says, hey, the moment goes to 0 there, it takes the value 0. And that will make it easy for us to actually look at other systems, or to look at these systems and immediately draw our line through that point, because physically it's impossible for a moment to be resisted there, to be created there. And that is because of this hinge here, and that hinge really physically allows rotation, and if a rotation is allowed, then the moment cannot be created. Therefore, it's equal to 0.